Hi, I'm Allison Gentala.
And I'm Peter Gentala.
And together we are the Directors of Government Affairs for Arizona Families for Home Education.
You know, Arizona has some of the best laws in the state for homeschool freedom. And it didn't just happen that way by itself. Over the last 35 years, dedicated volunteers have taken time to get to know their lawmakers and help Arizona's public officials understand how important it is that parents have the freedom to control the education and upbringing of their children.
And now we are left with the task of protecting those laws and ensuring that we don't have new bills introduced to the legislature that would bring burdensome regulation on Arizona homeschool families. Some of the things we do at the Capitol are interact with legislators, search all the new bills coming in to the legislature. We attend stakeholder meetings and meet with different types of elected officials.
Now, the last legislative session was an interesting one. Not a whole lot got done. It was a short session. Like everything else, it was heavily interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. But what we anticipate moving forward into the next legislative session, which will begin in January of 2021, is that there will be a renewed focus on Arizona's education laws. This is because families across the state and across the country had to make new decisions about how they were going to handle education for their children in their own homes. We want to make sure we're part of those conversations and that we don't see the laws that have been put together very carefully through the years protecting homeschool freedom compromised in any way.
The task ahead is great, and we want you to join us. So look for updates on how you can join with us to have your voice heard at the legislature this upcoming session.
We're eager to partner with you. And to learn more about Arizona's laws protecting homeschool freedom and the context behind them, click the link at the bottom of the screen and you can find out all you need to know about this important area. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cindy Duell, and I want to talk to you about what is possibly everyone's favorite way that AFHE serves the homeschool community in Arizona, the Homeschool Convention. We have done this for 36 years running until 2020. We were sorry not to be able to present it this year, and we were sorry not to be able to be with all of you for what would have been our 37th annual convention. But 2021 is coming up really soon, and we're looking forward to being together again. We have to describe the AFHE convention as something like a homeschool shopping mall packaged together with a professional development conference and networking with all your best friends. So if you are interested in something like that, you are going to love the AFHE convention. If you've been before, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't been before, you're going to want that on your calendar. This fall we'll be rolling out some announcements about what that's going to look like next year, when you can put it on your calendar, and you can start planning. We're looking forward to seeing you again. Thanks.
My name is Sean Duell, and I'd like to tell you about a very exciting effort that AFHE has been engaged in for a number of years. Many parents wonder whether homeschooling can adequately prepare a student for college. I assure you that it definitely can. AFHE regularly hears from families, students, and even college professors that the very nature of homeschooling tends to prepare students to engage with their course material and their teachers and work independently. We commend and want to inspire those of you who are homeschooling through high school. And to that end, we have established the AFHE Scholarship Fund. Every year, those of us on the AFHE Scholarship Committee have the unique pleasure and privilege of getting acquainted with dozens of Arizona homeschool graduates through their applications for AFHE scholarships. The academic achievement, test scores, community involvement, letters of recommendation, and maturity and character of these scholarship applicants all provide resounding testimony of their fitness for college-level work and beyond. And that tells us what great investment and dedication their parents are putting in. Donations to the AFHE Scholarship Fund are tax deductible, and every dollar donated goes strictly to scholarship awards. Through donations from individuals and our designated fundraisers, we are able to direct thousands of dollars each year to deserving students who are pursuing higher education or professional training programs. Please support the AFHE Scholarship Fund and help launch even more of Arizona's homeschool students into their future endeavors. Gifts of any size are welcome. Applications for scholarships open in November to be awarded the following April. You can read about the application requirements and submission deadlines at afhe.org. Thank you.
Hi, we're Scott and Sherry McCowan, and together we've been serving on the AFHE board since 2012. We've served in many different capacities, from exhibit hall coordinators for the convention. You've been the support groups liaison for a season, and I served as the president for a few years. Now I'm serving more in a marketing role, and where are you serving right now?
So I'm serving as the AFHE graduation coordinator. We've graduated all 4 of our children in homeschooling, so serving in this capacity is very rewarding. Yes, homeschooling our children through high school has been a rich time of watching them grow physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. We've seen the rewards discovered in their growing faith, their ownership in choosing a career path, and their confident independence. Celebrating with an amazing graduation ceremony hosted by AFHE is a very special way to close a homeschooling chapter. Each year, AFHE's graduation team makes a great effort to honor you and your graduating seniors. You are the amazing families who have spent years investing in your children. We are proud to partner with you, the parents, grandparents, siblings, and friends in making the completion of the high school journey a very special day of celebration. We have seen Arizona homeschooled graduates rise up and thrive in college and in life. We are so proud to be part of your journey. We look forward to continue serving and supporting you, the Arizona home education community, and we look forward to seeing you soon at our upcoming events.
That's incredible, honey. It's fun to serve and partner with such a great Arizona homeschooling community. I personally enjoy getting to work with our amazing marketing team and bringing valuable offers from curriculum providers, local businesses that support homeschoolers, and other amazing resources for homeschooling families to use and participate in. As a member of AFHE, you can see a lot of these offers and specials through our emails and social media posts. You can check out our benefits on our website at afhe.org. And no matter where you are in your journey of homeschooling, know that you are not alone. We are a community and here to serve you and your family. Thank you for being a member of AFHE and supporting homeschoolers all across Arizona. God bless you and your family.
Hi, I'm Zan Tyler, and welcome to this special AFHE Keynote event. I'm delighted to be here with you, although I always miss being in person with all of you guys in Arizona. You have such a special place in my heart. So I want to talk today about our keynote topic, pulling in the same direction, a family vision for homeschooling. As we begin the school year, I think this whole concept of pulling in the same direction and having family vision will be key not only to your overall success as a homeschooling family this year, but it will also be key for your happiness and your children's happiness. It was actually Cindy Duell and Nancy Manos who came up with this topic that I just love, because I've always had a vision for homeschooling, but it was great to think about vision in terms of our entire family and not just our vision. So this idea was birthed in me when I taught a co-op class. Joe and I, so you have a little bit of background, began homeschooling in 1984, and when we began, I was threatened with jail by the state superintendent of education, which led into an 8-year journey of lawsuits and lobbying and developing a grassroots movement. And we also started an organization during that time called the South Carolina Association of Independent Homeschools, which we set up as an approval agency for homeschooling outside the public school sector. So parents would have a choice of going through us or going through their school district. That was in the 90s. And so in 1992, our state legislature actually named our organization in law as having power equal to school boards in supporting and approving homeschool programs in South Carolina. So my goal has always been to offer support to parents that I never had. When we started in homeschooling in 1984, I knew no one in the world who was homeschooling at that time. I was armed with one book and the advice and the counsel of the Holy Spirit. And it was just a very interesting time. I would have loved to have had more human support in my life. So I pray that what we're doing here today will really encourage you and support you. After we got our state organization going in the late 90s, Joe and I started a co-op that's actually still going to this day. And we, one of the things I taught was biblical worldview training and public speaking to kids of all ages. But in this particular class, I had a group of high school kids that were fabulous. This was a public speaking class. And I remember one day I thought, just sort of an extemporaneous model, I would get up and I would have each student get up and tell me why they thought their parents were homeschooling them. Now, these were bright, articulate kids, and I loved many of their families I knew well. And when I asked them why they thought their parents homeschooled them, there was dead silence. Now, I know these kids had a pretty strong idea, but they weren't ready to talk about that. So my assignment to them that day was for them to go home, interview their parents, come back with 5 reasons that their parents were homeschooling them so that we could talk about it. I also wanted them to come up with a list of ideas of reasons they enjoyed or loved being homeschooled. So when they came back to our co-op class the next week, I set up a big whiteboard behind me and I drew a line down the middle, and I put private on one side and public on the other side. So when we had a sort of a free-for-all brainstorming session before they got up and did their individual presentations, and I asked them, what are your parents' reasons for homeschooling? Why do you love it? So when they would give me the answer of, I love it because I can stay in my pajamas all day, I would say, okay, this goes under the private reasons we homeschool. These are family reasons. We talk about that among our families, but we don't talk about that when we're meeting a legislature or in church or somebody's asking us, why do you homeschool? And which was a bigger deal then than it is now, when everybody in the world has embraced homeschooling, whether they were ready to or not. And so we went through this exercise, and this is sort of the type of exercise I want you to go through with your children, or encourage you to go through with your children as you begin your school year. So I would encourage you to take one night to devote to this whole topic of why we homeschool. What are our reasons and what are our goals? Make it a pizza night or their favorite meal. If you can, have a whiteboard up or one of those big sheets of paper I use a lot, where they it sticks to the wall and you can write on it and everybody can input. So I would encourage you to take some time and talk to your children about why you homeschool. I think it's really important that you bring them into the discussion. Make sure you focus on the fact that the main impetus for you is your unconditional love for them, because only love can propel a parent to homeschool. Now, COVID has forced a lot of you into it, just like I felt forced into it in 1984. I feel your pain because I came into homeschooling kicking and screaming as well. And I want to encourage you that it has been one of the greatest blessings in our lives. One of the greatest gifts you'll give your children through this, and we'll talk about this later, is your time, your presence, and your unconditional love. So I think they need to understand that before you talk about curriculum or educational goals or anything else, you love them and you're looking forward to the year. One preacher said one time that the mother's heart is the child's classroom. So moms, I would just encourage you to guard your heart, and whether you've got all these feelings of anxiety that you're suppressing during this new school year, or whether you're intimidated if you're a new homeschool mom, or whether you're tired if you're a veteran homeschool mom, remember Scripture tells us to guard our hearts, and your heart really is your child's most important classroom. What you bring to the table every morning, your direction, your enthusiasm, and your love for them. So I would encourage you to bring them into the discussion. Why are you homeschooling? Is it but you were forced into it through COVID, or you feel God calling you to homeschool? Talk honestly about those things. If you were forced into homeschooling, I would also encourage you to think in advance about the positive things you can say. The more positive you are, the more positive your children will be. So include them in this discussion about goals and vision, so together you develop this family vision. And I would also encourage you to include them as much as possible in decision-making processes. What curriculum are you going to use? Which subjects are you going to cover? Now, some of these things are required by state law, but you can still give them some latitude. What is your schedule going to look like? When are you going to do math? What's their favorite subject? I would also ask each one of your children, what is something you've always wanted to study, or a subject or topic you've always wanted to explore but never had a chance? And this is especially true of your kids coming in from a public or institutional school setting. It's also great for veteran moms and dads to ask this question. The answers will surprise you. I have a niece and nephew, a niece who is homeschooling her kids for the first time this year, and she has a son who is just enthralled with World War II. Well, that's a great topic to just go off and let him study on his own. Her daughter is interested in chickens, and we have lots of families and friends over the years whose kids have learned so much by raising animals. One particular family had even led to a career as a veterinarian, this child's love for pigs. So let your children express what they're excited about and what they want to study. And then I think each child needs to know what your goals are for each one of them. When we started homeschooling, we had 3 or 4 goals, and then I added a couple as we went. The first was we just wanted our children to love Jesus. We wanted to have a strong, robust family life. I really believe that our families are like dictionaries, and in many, many ways, our family life will define our children, and in some senses, their future. So make sure you're giving them positive definitions of themselves. Service was always a priority in our home. It was part of our curriculum. So we had a service project every year our kids were engaged in, and that we were engaged in as families. And then later I realized I really wanted my children to be active, involved, knowledgeable citizens, acquainted with the foundational principles of American government. And then there was one thing my husband started that we always said to our kids. We heard James Dobson say this once. He would tell his kids every night, be there. And what he meant was, life is eternal, and at the end of the day, we all want to be in eternity together. So just at nighttime during the course of the day, we would always say to the kids, be there. So our Christianity, our faith, our eternal vision for life also shaped our reasons for homeschooling, and we wanted that to shape our kids. So there are 4 things I just want to mention to you quickly about homeschooling. I really believe that homeschooling is a revival movement on 4 different fronts, and we'll take them in not the same order as we go through the keynote, but I want to start with I think it's been a spiritual revival, and we'll talk about this again at the very end of the keynote. But if you're looking for a philosophy of education, you need help writing it. I ran across this after we had homeschooled for years, and this really became my rallying theme, and it was actually written by the founders of Harvard University. Harvard was founded in 1636. I think they wrote their rules and precepts in 1646. Let every student be plainly instructed and earnestly pressed to consider well. The main end of his life and studies is to know God in Jesus Christ, which is eternal life, and therefore lay Christ at the bottom as the only foundation of all sound knowledge and learning. So that's a great way to look at homeschooling, that we can teach our children that have a cutting edge education that also encourages and maintains their faith. I believe that homeschooling is a family revival, and it has revived and invigorated hundreds and thousands of families across this nation. It's a bonding experience, and it really does build stronger families. Alan Carlson, who is a PhD researcher on the family, said that just by bringing one activity home, that of teaching our children, it really invigorates the family and gives us a new purpose, so that the family is not a place where our kids come home to charge their electronic devices and sleep and change clothes, but it becomes an integral part of their lives. I really believe that homeschooling has been an educational revival. One statistic I love to talk about is homeschooling has really moved the bell curve over a quartile, which is a huge success academically. And to explain that, when kids take nationally normed tests in the public school, by definition, their average score is the 50th percentile. In the homeschooling community, our average scores tend to be 76% and above. So we have moved that average from 50 to 75%, which is a huge academic accomplishment. And if you're worried about whether your children can get into college, let me just put that fear aside for you. College admissions agents and counselors are actively recruiting these kids because they say they come to college with a sense of academic vitality and intellectual passion. They're not burned out from being in a school setting for 12 years. They said that they have taken ownership of their own education, because homeschooling in many ways, especially in high school, forces that on them as their mothers turn more and more of their learning over to them. And the surprising thing for them, because it's counterintuitive, is how homeschool students are great leaders once they come onto the college campus. Employers love homeschool students for the same reason. The Kiplinger report talked about how homeschool kids are highly motivated and self-directed. So let me help you put those fears aside if you're worried about your kids' future as they homeschool, especially at the high school years. And then I think very importantly, homeschooling has been a revival of the founding principles of our American heritage. And we'll talk about that a little later on in the session too. So I want to begin with this idea of pulling in the same direction, building strong families and bonding together. My husband often talks about the power of shared emotional experiences and how that bonds you together. That has a negative side and a positive side. When he was at work and they'd have these projects that would last for 6 months, and toward the end they'd be working around the clock. He was an IT project manager. He said it was interesting the bonding that occurred, and as good as that was, in some ways there were affairs that would spin off from that because these men and women were spending this intense time together. But you do see the power in those shared emotional experiences and that intimacy that should be happening in your home. So I want to read you a quote by Jane Fonda. Now, I'm not holding her up as an example. I just want you to glimpse into her life. And if you're not familiar with Jane Fonda, she was a famous actress going back into the 80s. Her father, Henry Fonda, was famous. Her brother, Peter Fonda. So she grew up in a very famous household, very wealthy household, but very dysfunctional household. And this is what she said about it in retrospect. Everybody has issues. For me, the challenge is intimacy, but I didn't really start to get that until I turned 60. My big regret would be if I had never had an intimate relationship. But if you never grew up with intimacy, if you were never with parents who really loved each other, and you never saw that and absorbed it as a kid, it's hard to know how to do it. So we don't want that to be our children's experience. We want them to grow up in a family where you're bonded together, you're pulling in the same direction, and you have this family vision of where you want to go. So there's several ways that we can bond as a family. And the first is really just time. The more time you have together and you use that time well, the closer you're going to become. I can remember I went to college during the height of the rise of the feminist movement, and this great conversation emerged about how it's not the quantity of time you spend with your kids, it's the quality time that you spend with them. Well, if you've got young children or 5-year-olds or whatever the age they are, can you imagine saying to them, I'm going to be at work all this week, but when we come home, we're going to schedule quality time at 6 o'clock at night for a 5-year-old. So you'll find as you homeschool that while the amount of time you have with your children may seem daunting, it's one of the greatest gifts that homeschooling is going to give you. I can remember when my boys were 9 and 7, we had our daughter, and we had lost a little girl 2 years before, a year and a half before Lizzie was born, when I was 6 months pregnant. And I almost died during the process. We were in the middle of a legislative battle in South Carolina. So the whole thing was just horrible, really. The Lord is good and taught us so many lessons through it. But I'll never forget this sweet lesson right before Lizzie was born. There's so many things I've said I'd never do in life. Once I started homeschooling, I said I'd never have a baby in August or September at the beginning of a school year. So of course Lizzie was born in September. In August, I was just so paranoid about losing time and not being able to keep up with my schedule. So don't do that, women. Learn from me. Take a deep breath and try to enjoy your family. Worry less. If I could tell you one thing, it would be to worry less and enjoy your children more. So we were in August. Feel like I was trying to get a year's worth of school done in August before Lizzie was due in the 1st of September. And my oldest son looked at me and said, "Mom, how do you make a baby love you?" Now this was in the middle of our math lesson. I said, "Ty, we're not going to talk about that now." He was the king of distraction. We'll talk about it later. Well, that was a really important question I should have addressed with him. But the moment was lost and we went on. And when Lizzie was about 2 weeks old, I was sound asleep. And all of a sudden, Ty was at my side. He was 9, as I said, and he poked me and he said, "Mom, Lizzie was crying and I could tell you didn't hear her." It was one of those rare moments when I actually slept through a crying baby. And he said, "So I got her up and I changed her diaper and I cleaned the umbilical cord like the doctor taught us and I rocked her. But she still needs you because she must be hungry." So Ty laid her in my arms in the bed, and he walked out the door and he turned around and he said, "You know, Mom, that question about how do you make a baby love you? Now I know. You spend lots and lots of time with her and she'll love you back." So really out of the mouth of babes, and I've really never forgotten that lesson I learned from Ty. The other way besides our time that we bond with our children is just our presence. You know, there's that old, I think it's a Larson cartoon where there's a dog with 2 fleas on it, and it says, "Sometimes I wonder if and the one flea says to the other, "Sometimes I wonder if there really is a dog." Well, sometimes we wonder if there really is a God, and we take his presence for granted in our lives, just like these fleas did the dog. And in the same way, our kids in society often take for granted the presence of parents, but don't understand the unmitigated power in your active presence in their lives. You know, when Jesus, who was the same today, yesterday, and forever, was on earth and he was getting ready to disciple 12 men who would eventually change the world, turn the world upside down. He had access to every Sunday school curriculum, mentoring curriculum, every curriculum that would ever had been and would be written during the course of human events. And what did Jesus choose? He chose to be with them. He discipled them through his presence. He taught them actively. He traveled with them. He refereed their fights. You know, they wondered who was going to be on his right, who was going to be on his left. Today, our kids have the same fights, littler fights, but who gets the front seat of the minivan today, or, who goes first or whatever. So it's not an old fight. It's not a new fight. It's an old fight. But we're there to teach and train them, to disciple them through their fights, through their failures, through their good times. And so your presence is so, so powerful, and bonding. And I want to share with you too, just the power of being there for your children when they experience painful moments. And I want to tell you a story about my son Ty, who went to college on a soccer scholarship, and during his junior year, we both have hemiplegic migraines, and he took a medication from a new doctor had prescribed that he was contraindicated for, and it caused him to go blind in his right eye. So they called me from school, said, Miss Tyler, he was in Chattanooga, it's about a 350-mile drive, you need to come up immediately, which of course I did. And so we didn't know at first, was it the medication? Was it mitochondrial myopathy? Was it terminal? Was it migraine related? So we went through all these tests, just test after test. And in the process, I had to go speak with the registrar at Covenant College. And when I did, I was just raw and a nervous wreck. This is about 2 weeks after the event, and we could tell his eyesight was not coming back immediately. I walked into the registrar's office, and it was this huge, intimidating, stark office. I guess it might have been a conference room. And there was this conference room table in there to me that looked like it was like 20 by 20 feet big. I was on one side, Rodney Miller, the registrar, was on the other side. And I was worried about what this was going to do with Ty's scholarship, with his school year. Could he stay in college? And all these thoughts are swirling in my head. And Rodney Miller looked at me and he said, Zan, are you okay? How are you handling this? And when somebody is kind to you, the floodgates just opened. And I just sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. Excuse me. It was not a pretty cry. It was one of those, tears running down my cheeks. And I felt so sorry for Rodney because I could not get myself together. So I'll never forget what Rodney did. There was a Kleenex in the middle of the table that I could not reach with my short arms. And he got up, he got a Kleenex out of the box. He came around the table. He kneeled at my feet and he reached up and he wiped the tears from my eyes. I will never forget that experience as long as I live. And it was at that moment that healing started with me in this whole process of this trial we went through with Ty. And there's a verse in Revelation that says, then I heard a loud voice from heaven say, look, God's dwelling is with humanity and he will live with us. They will be his people and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will no longer exist. Grief, crying, and pain will no longer exist because the previous things have passed away. Behold, the new has come. And just the small things when you're home with your kids on a daily basis that are bonding that you never think about are wiping the tears from their eyes. When they're hurt, when they've physically fallen, they've scraped their knees, they have a boo-boo, or they get older and they're hurt emotionally by their friends or they're spiritually hurt, that act of being there for them and wiping the tears from their eyes is a really bonding experience. So don't, sometimes we look for the major moments to be the most bonding things, and sometimes it's just walking through the day together, caring for each other, nurturing their faith, healing their hurts, wiping the tears from their eyes, that are going to make you strong families. And homeschooling really gives you that time to focus together. So if you're homeschooling for just 1 year while you wait to see what's going to happen for COVID, I really encourage you to focus on bonding with your children. You may never have this much time with them together again in your lives. And then I think we need to remember that our words are binding. We forget how important conversation is. Scripture tells us that the power of life and death are in the tongue. And we need, Scripture also says, how lovely on the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who announces peace and brings good news of happiness, who announces salvation. We need to be good news bearers for our children. We need to remain positive. The world around us is falling apart, but we can tell them on a daily basis that, as this verse says, your God reigns, and help them to learn to live in peace in spite of and in the midst of their circumstances. One thing I think that I'd just like to tell you about for just a few minutes is to watch the positivity, or watch your tongue, and make sure you're giving a positive report. Scripture talks a lot about giving a positive report. When Moses sent out the 12 spies to check out the land, we know that 10 came back and said, oh, it's a great land, but we'll never take it because there are giants in the land and there's this in the land. And they gave, the Bible actually says in Numbers, they gave a negative report. Caleb and Joshua came in and gave a positive report that was faith-based and life-giving. Oh, we can take this land if we'll just have faith, and if we'll believe that God is bigger than the giants in the land. And so we want to give that positive report to our children, not only of life in general, but of their lives. I can remember when our kids, Lizzie was 5 and the boys were 12 and 14, and I'm 5 feet tall, and they were already like 5'8" and 5'10". And they towered over me. Every morning, Lizzie would have me stand between the boys, and she'd say, Mom, you're short. You're really short. Now, this is my cute, sweet little 5-year-old whom I adore. And she didn't mean any harm, but it was interesting because I went to testify at a Senate Education Committee, and I did what I always do. I stood in the back of the room and I cased the joint. And I'm looking to see, are my yes votes there? Did the no votes show up? Who's speaking against me? What educational organization are represented? How many homeschoolers in the crowd? And then this thought pops into my head. Zan, you're short. You're really short. You're gonna be the shortest person in the room. They're gonna think you're stupid because you're so short. Well, you know, in all my years, I've always been short. I've never had that thought until Lizzie kept telling me that every day. So as homeschooling moms, I just want you to know there's power in what you say. So it's easy when we homeschool to devolve into nitpicking and negativity, because first of all, we know what our kids are capable of, and it aggravates us when they don't give us their best, and it should, but there are better ways to handle it than nitpicking. Are you gonna do that again today? Do you have a bad attitude? Why can't you do this like your brother? Or look at how Mary next door does this. So we need to watch that. And the other reason I think we do it is because we're investing our lives in our children, and doggone it, they better make us look good when we go out into public. And so we've got to set those things aside and look at giving a positive report to our kids. That doesn't mean we don't correct them. That doesn't mean we don't discipline them for bad behavior or teach them through those experiences. It's not the power of positive thinking, but Scripture just tells us there's power in our words. There's something called the Pygmalion effect, a study that Duquesne University did years ago. And the gist of it was teacher expectation is one of the greatest predictors of achievement for students. And so your expectations are going to be key in your children's lives. You want them to be positive expectations. This study went on to say faculty who gripe about students establish a climate of failure, but faculty who value their students' abilities create a climate of success. So you want to constantly think, what kind of climate, what kind of learning environment am I establishing in my home? So real quickly, I want to mention a couple of other things about conversation and how important it is and how bonding it is and how positive, powerful conversation really does help you pull in the same direction, and your words together over small mundane things and over eternal things are going to help your kids develop this family vision and this vision of life and hope. There's a book called Endangered Minds by an educational neurologist and psychologist, Dr. Jane Healy. And one of the things she set out to do in this book that she wrote in the late 90s, I believe, was to figure out why kids aren't learning like they used to. One of the things she said was the biggest detriment to learning was the lack of conversation in the school and the home. She quoted one neurologist that said, Dr. Shefflin, like many others, is concerned that children are not receiving large enough daily doses of talk, either at home or at school. There's one study that says even the most expensive private school, there are only 8 to 10 private or personal interactions between student and teacher. So you can see at the home, it's hundreds and thousands of interactions a day, depending on how talkative your children were. So back to this doctor, with increasing numbers of young children spending time in daycare or school settings, we must pay special attention to kids talking and having language experiences of all kinds in any type of medium. It's just critical. Kids have to talk. They should be encouraged constantly to talk, and older people need to participate with them, guide them, help them develop and expand their abilities. When my oldest son went to college, I wanted to have him tested. He was my first. He was our guinea pig. Homeschool kids were in college, weren't the norm then. Whereas when my youngest daughter went to college, every application said, here's what you do if you're homeschooled. It wasn't like that when Ty went to college in the 1990s. And so I had him tested, and I wanted to make sure he could handle all the academics, which he did. And but one of the things the doctor did was send me to an audiologist because of Ty's history of ear infections. And she told me that because of his history, she was sure he had an auditory processing problem. As a matter of fact, she said, I've never seen a student with his medical history that didn't. We'll talk about learning styles in a minute. Ty's an auditory kinesthetic learner. And so if he couldn't process auditorily, he was in big trouble in the classroom. She comes back later and she says, Miss Tyler, I want to talk to you about how you homeschooled. And I said, well, we talked a lot. Ty was very auditory. I'd read a page, he'd read a page. We'd talk about every assignment together. If we didn't talk about it, it did not stay in his brain. Now, I've got another son who's a visual learner. He would say, give me my books, Mom, get out of the way, and I can learn something. And so every child is so different, but this audiologist said to me, Ty does not have an auditory learning process problem. And she said, I think it's all the conversation in your home has created new neural pathways that have replaced those damaged neural pathways from all those ear infections. And there's a quote in this same book, Endangered Mind, that says, Dr. Scheibel is personally convinced that interaction with adults, including language stimulation, is one of the growing brain's most important assets. Without being melodramatic, he said, I think it would be very important to tell parents they are participating in the physical development of their youngsters' brains to the exact degree that they interact with them, communicate with them. Language interaction is actually building tissue in their brains, so it's also helping build youngsters' futures. So if nothing else, all your conversation in your home, your desire to be positive with them, your desire to unleash their potential, all of those things will revolve around the conversations you have with them. That conversation is discipling your children, and it's also educational goal because it's helping your kids build bigger brains, and it's bonding. So conversation is a free tool. It's a powerful tool that we need to learn to harness. One of the great things about homeschooling is that you can actually focus on each child and the way they learn. George Bernard Shaw, who is the British playwright, said, my tailor is the smartest man in my life. Every time I see him, he takes new measurements. And so what he was saying, everybody else assumes I'm going to be the same all the time. Well, with our children, every day in the homeschool, we have the chance to take new measurements on them. How are they doing? As one educational person said, we need to ask 3 questions about our children every day. Where are they at? Where are they going? And how are we going to get them there? We can do that with our kids. I was teaching another public speaking class at our co-op. And this was a class of all boys. There was like a dozen boys, 10 to 15 years old, and both of my boys were in college for the first year. And I just loved this boy time because I missed my son so much. So we had this, I had brought in like 30 or 40 huge National Geographic maps. I mean, some of them were 5x7, some were 4x6, but they were huge. They were our extemporaneous tool for the day, prop for the day. So after it was over, I'm hurriedly trying to get those maps folded so the next class can come into our 1 day a week co-op. And I'm folding and I'm folding and I'm folding, and the map's about this thick. I have no spatial relation skills. One of the 13-year-old boys came up to me and said, "Miss Tyler, give me those maps. I can fold them." And so he took those maps and had them folded up in nothing flat. I said, "Shane, honey, how did you do that?" He kind of rolled his eyes at me in a very polite way, and he said, "Miss Tyler, you got to fold them the way they're bent." And it reminds me, I had been doing a study by Charles Swindoll at the time, and it was on Proverbs 22:6. Teach a youth about the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Swindoll says, we might paraphrase the verse to read, adapt the training of your children so that it is in keeping with their individual gifts or bents, the God-given characteristics built into them at birth. When maturity comes, they will not leave the training they have received. So as we're pulling in the same direction, the biggest thing that can help that is to figure out, study our children, and learn how God has created them, how they're bent. Because if you have a child who is gifted to be an artist, but you're dead set that he's going to be a mathematician, you're going to have conflict. You're not going to be able to pull together. You're going to be pulling each other apart. So if you want to pull in the same direction, learn what makes each child tick. When we started homeschooling, I knew nothing about learning styles. It was before the learning style craze, and so you'll have to give me a little grace here. When we first started, I was using a curriculum that was really not suitable for my kids, especially my oldest son. And it said every morning, you have your children sit down, put their hands on the desk, keep their feet flat, and look you in the eye. And it was really a speak if spoken to type of arrangement, have them raise their hands. And I would feel so guilty every day because we never had a school day that looked like that. So one morning I thought, okay, today we are having real school in the Tyler household. I told the boys we had an enclosed garage that we had turned into our schoolroom with sofas where we could snuggle, and it was really a holding room where we could keep all of our stuff, you know. And so we're in our schoolroom, and I looked at the boys and I said, today, I read the directions. This is what we're doing. Ty, you've got to keep your hands still, no coloring or playing with your little mini cars or anything. We are going to have real school. It was the most miserable day of our lives. Ty said nothing. He was always the catalyst in the conversation. And John, who is very caring, was so concerned about Ty being upset. He was upset. And so at the end of the day, I told the Lord, okay, I don't know what happened here, but we can't do this anymore. So in God's providence, a few weeks later, I went to this little toy boutique. I needed to buy a birthday present, and they had the wooden bridge train set we couldn't afford for our kids. So the boys would play with the train set, and I could look in their book nook. So I picked up this book, which is now out of print, called Growing Up Learning by Walter Barb, who was a professor at OSU. And he started talking about there are 3 ways that kids learn: auditorily through hearing, kinesthetic through moving and touching, and then visual through seeing. And he said, he was telling what characterized each type of learner. And then he started talking about the auditory learner, how they learn by talking, and that's an unacceptable behavior in the classroom. And if you happen to have an auditory kinesthetic learner who learns by talking and by moving, those are totally unacceptable behaviors in the classroom. I'm going ding, 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 ding. And he said those kids often make the biggest successes in life if you can get them through school. So I just want to encourage you. I felt so much guilt that I couldn't make time be still. And then I realized that's how God made him. That's his gift. That's what makes him a great salesman today. His spiritual gift is evangelism. It's all the talking and caring for people. It just fit. So I call that day Independence Day in our homeschooling, where I could relax and let my kids live and function the way they were bent. In the same book, he told about a graduate student he had been working with, and she said she had always had problems in school. She was auditory kinesthetic, and she said, I had to focus so much on being still and quiet. I had no mental bandwidth left to focus on what a professor or teacher was telling me. And I'm going ding, 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 ding. That's why Ty couldn't focus that day and answer any of my questions. So, he'd bounce the ball. John, who was a visual learner, would often stand on his head until he was on like 7 or 8 through half of our lessons. And I just learned that that's part of the beauty of homeschooling. So today Ty's a salesman. He was a deacon in his church. John is the attorney and the exhorter. He's an elder in our church, where my husband serves as an elder too. So I just want to encourage you to study your children and find out who they are and what makes them tick. One other thing I want to talk to you about is the strengths in your children. Eric Little, who was the Olympic runner that we see featured in Chariots of Fire, he felt God calling him to go to China on the mission field. And he told his sister once, he said, I know God's called me to be a missionary, but he's also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. So when we're homeschooling, we can look at our kids and see what gives them that kind of pleasure. What's their strength? What's their passion? What's their giftedness? And you can help them develop and follow those things. My boys were very interested in governmental issues and politics because they were raised in the state legislature with me. They had a lot of opportunities that way. They were also great athletes, and so they played a lot of sports. That was a springboard for ministry. They worked with FCA camps. My son John organized a soccer team at the request of a pastor in town, not our pastor, but to take to England and Wales to use as an evangelical outreach tool. So Lizzie was always very interested in the fine arts. So, in her high school years, she might have, if she was in a performance, maybe 40 hours a week devoted to the fine arts, teaching and training and being in performances. And she later went on to become an executive producer with a large network in Los Angeles. So we see that if we can tap into that thing, that passion, where they feel God's pleasure, then that is really going to bond us with them as we try to give them opportunities and ways to live out their calling. It's going to bond us with them. We are pulling in the same direction. We are not pulling each other apart. And I want to talk to you for just a few minutes too about the concept of understanding the foundational principles of America and why it's important to teach our children those principles, and also the history of our nation. Some good, some bad. But the foundational principles are always there as the guiding light to make us better and better. These founding principles come from the Declaration and the Constitution. All men are created equal. We are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. Just governments are based on the consent of the governed. And a fourth one I've added for today is we really need to value and fight for the importance of free speech and religious freedom for all people. We all should be able to say what we believe and live out our beliefs as long as they're nonviolent. and they're not tearing down. So I would, Mike Ferris just delivered a great speech, Patrick Henry graduation, where he goes over all of that. I'd encourage you to look at that. But this really hit home to me. Joe and I were speaking at the Homeschool Leadership Conference in Williamsburg. And while I was speaking, Joe ran to the visitor center, because it's one of our favorite places on earth to be, to buy our passes for the weekend. And it was just a ghost town. So Joe said to one of the docents, it was March, I guess maybe when spring break happens or we get a little bit later into the spring season, y'all will be hopping again. And she said, oh, not so much. Our attendance is down 30% or more because public schools have quit teaching the principles of American government and history. So I would really encourage you that you need to teach and train your children in the American system of government, these foundational principles. We do not want to become a socialist government. We can look at history and see how socialism and Marxism often lead to the loss of freedom, the loss of religious freedom, the loss of freedom of speech, the loss to provide an income for our family the way we want to. So here are some suggestions. Take your children to vote with you. If you're voting by ballot from home, walk them through the process. Teach them the importance of elections, what it means that we're a free society, and every 4 years, we change the president, and every 2 years the Congress, and every 6 years the senators have to run. And so our government is constantly changing hands without the violence we've seen in other countries. And so we need to explain to them the importance of the Electoral College. Look at different local candidates in your area. Teach them to study the platform. What do they believe? What do they think about the family? What do they think about pro-life issues? What do they think about educational issues and free speech issues? And then as your kids get older, they can volunteer in campaigns. Make election night special. That was always a special night for us. We would have blank maps. We would watch the election returns. We'd have Coke and popcorn and stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning if necessary. And the kids would color in red state or blue state, whoever won, and mark the number of electoral votes. And we would keep up with that throughout the night. So I would tell you that your input into your kids' lives in terms of making them conscious of their freedom and our founding principles is key. It's one of the last bastions left, I think, in the education system where we're actually teaching these things. And then I just want to end by talking about spiritual growth and revival. I remember years and years ago, Elizabeth Smith, one of my dear, dear friends and the wife of Mike Smith, president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association, asked me to do a project with her based on the concept that homeschooling is a revival movement. And I thought, oh gosh, I would love to believe that, but that was just such a foreign thought to me at that time. So I was reading and studying the history of revivals when a pastor came to our church, and he had his several doctorate degrees, Archie Parrish, and he had been vice president of Evangelism Explosion internationally, and he just made it his life to study revivals. So after that, I emailed Dr. Parrish and I said, Dr. Parrish, do you think homeschooling is a revival movement? We've seen that it's an educational revival movement, a family revival movement, a freedom revival movement. I wanted to know if it was a spiritual revival movement. And he wrote me back and he said, Zan, do you know what the Puritan verse for revival is? I said, no. And he said, it's Malachi 4:6. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. And he said, because homeschooling does that, I would definitely say it's a revival movement. Now listen to the New Testament version of that verse, Luke 1:17. And he will go before him in the spirit and the power of Elijah to turn the hearts of fathers to their children and the disobedient to the understanding of the righteous, to make ready for the Lord a prepared people. So I just want to encourage you, as phenomenal as homeschooling is, educationally, building our families, being a revival movement of freedom, make sure that you're making your children ready, a prepared people for the Lord. In Scripture, there are 4 be readies. be ready for every good work. Let me get my list here. Be ready for service in Luke 12. Be ready for every good work in Titus 3. Always be ready to give defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that was in you, 1 Peter 3. And then there's a verse in Matthew 24:44 that says, so you must also be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour that you do not expect him. So we want our kids to be ready to meet Jesus. And so I just want to encourage you as parents today. You're pulling in the same direction. You're creating this family vision. Take time to enjoy your children. Focus on the important things. Bond with them through your conversation, through the time you spend with them, through doing fun things with them. Get outside as much as you can while we're still in a closed down state. Do some stargazing at night. Put on your creative thinking cap. And most of all, view this as a time where you can also really nurture your children's faith. As I close, I just want to talk to you for a few minutes about what I'm doing with my life now, and share that information with you. I've been in the homeschooling movement for about 35 or more years, and the first half of my year was spent freedom fighting, developing organizations to support homeschoolers. The last half of my year, I've been working with Christian publishers to develop homeschooling curriculum and resources that are educationally robust and exciting, but have a very, very strong biblical worldview foundation. So today I'm working with BJU Press and Homeworks, which is actually a sponsor for the AFHE convention in this keynote session. And I want to tell you why I'm with them. First of all, it's a curriculum that it's K through 12, all subjects, so it's a complete curriculum, but it also allows the flexibility to insert your children's learning styles in the way you teach. The focus a lot is on developing critical thinking skills, so you'll be doing a lot of conversation with your children, and we've talked about how important that is. And one of the key things to me, that it is very, very thoughtfully and genuinely biblically based. So this biblical worldview is woven throughout the curriculum. It's not just a Bible verse here and a Bible verse tacked on there, but really teaching our children how to think and live as Christians for God's glory and for the love of their neighbors, for the good of the culture. How can we love our neighbors as Christ loved us and as we love ourselves? So if you want more information on the BJU Press curriculum, I would encourage you to go to a website, homeschoolhelp.com/map. There are 200 homeschool moms that are consultants through Homeworks for the BJU Press curriculum. They can answer your questions about choosing curriculum. They will be mentor moms for you if they need that. You can call them all hours of the day. They're homeschool moms too. They are all homeschooling moms, which is fabulous. Some have retired and now their kids are all gone, but for the most part everyone is currently homeschooling, so they can answer all of your questions. How do I get my kids ready for high school? How do I handle this sibling rivalry? How do I teach more than one children at once? So if you go to homeschoolinghelp.com/map, you can scroll down and find a consultant near you on the map. Just click on your particular state. So I want to thank you so much for the privilege of being here. I'm praying for your school year. I'm praying for AFHE. I love all the folks there associated with AFHE. And I pray that you will be blessed as you pull together in the same direction and develop a family vision of homeschooling. Thank you.